Senate chamber.
Sounds which may be associated with their devices. The tablet is function and F8. And also, can I ask members to declare any interest, financial or otherwise, just as we move through today's business. Apologies, we have no apologies. We have a full house today. Can I welcome Colin Eastwood, who is our new temporary member, I believe, to the Education Committee. Just keeping the seat warm for Sean while he recuperates. But you're very welcome in the meantime.
Thank you.
Moving then through to chairperson's business, we had the Marshall report yesterday. The ministerial statement from the DHSSPS. This included comments and commitments from the Education Minister that all children will receive CSE preventative education and that further advice and guidance will be made available to schools, parents and carers. So if you're content that we write to DE prior to the briefing on iMatter on the 10th of December, just seeking information on their plans with regard to that. And obviously that this is an issue which isn't going to go away, and we may need to refer to it again. There's a task force and so on going to be set up, so I think that again that might be something that we want to monitor. Yesterday we had our informal meeting with the unions on the NITPS. Members are content that we maybe write to DE seeking information and clarity on a number of issues that were raised, and I'll list them here just in case members wish to add anything further. The age profile of retirees, union membership of the pensions board, the provision of a pensions calculator and annual statements for teachers, which I found actually quite unusual, the fact that teachers actually don't get an annual statement for their pension. Reported lack of pensions expertise in managing authorities, whether the 10-year gap is to be maintained between normal pension age and the earliest age for retirement, whether further early retirement phased options are being explored, and that was being promoted by NIHT, and they found that actually quite an interesting piece of work, and it was now sort of being taken up on a more regular basis. Whether there are any guarantees in respect of no further increases in contributions for teachers, and I think that's something that we ourselves had explored as a committee. Whether teachers electing to retire early and make additional contributions are obliged to do so at the start of their careers, because I think that was clearly an issue that had to be decided within 6 months of starting. And I think whenever you're 22, you're starting out in your career, retirement is not something that you're considering. And also highlighting concerns in respect of the complexity of the proposed changes and calling indeed to do more to explain teacher pension options. So I'm not sure whether members had anything further to add to that list.
It wasn't writing to them, it was one of the big union, I forgot his name, was it Wilkinson?
With NICIE.
He indicated that they might have figures for the number of people who wanted to retire early. I thought if we could get a slightly more accurate indication of that, because it's a huge number of people. That's happening early, but it does not the whole thing. We need more. We need to know more about it, and I think we should write to them.
To NICIE?
Yeah.
On that subject, yeah.
Okay, but it might be useful if not just write exclusively to them, because obviously they're not the only union representing teachers here. So
there were yesterday for 6 places on the committee, one for each union, and the NASUWT were emphasised that they were by far the largest union. I wasn't familiar even with some of the other unions. Do we have any? Could we get some figures for just what the relative membership is of these different groups in Northern Ireland?
Do we know which one's excluded?
Which one is excluded? How do you mean? There were 6 unions there yesterday.
Well, there was one who didn't turn up, wasn't there?
But in terms of the NITC, Northern Ireland Teachers Council, I think I'm right in saying that the ASCL is not on that.
Okay.
So
that's the only one, yes. Yeah, okay.
I believe so. But they were asking for 6 places. Okay, so we're going to break down.
Just to get a sense of it.
Okay. Robin.
2 things, Chair. In response to the question yesterday about phased
retirement, I think I picked up that one of the trade unions actually indicated that they were successfully introducing phased retirements, but it may be something that doesn't suit all of the unions, and the teachers at a certain level may not be. Could we try to understand which teachers category that phased retirement does suit? Could you just, Chair, ask, where is the break between teachers and lecturers, and what is is there a difference in the pensions of teachers and lecturers?
Teachers or members of the Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme will be registered with the General Teaching Council and teach in schools. Lecturers are not members of the
I think they are actually members of the Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme, lecturers.
Huh? Right, well, sorry, my mistake, right to the department.
Okay.
And was the view of lecturers reflected?
Taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Might that be something that we want to raise with Dell?
Well, it may not. That's the thought.
Once we get the information back, we may want to do that.
If they're part of the same pension scheme, as Trevor says, but they are actually within a different government department, then what is the crossover between the two?
Trevor's right.
Okay. Members content? Okay, thank you. Christmas cards. I'd like to seek agreement from you if you're content that we send. I'm assuming hard copy Christmas cards are real Christmas cards as opposed to e-cards.
Yes.
Okay, so we're content that we send real Christmas cards to witnesses
Christmas cards.
and correspondence during 2014. Okay, agreed.
Sure. What's the cost of that? I'll fill up the price on Christmas.
60p a card.
It's humbug
It
side
depends on how
stories.
many we send is the answer, but I will come back to members with the cost before they make a final decision.
Sure. Any real problems with e-cards?
80 cards.
Get full.
I like e-cards. It's like saying Xmas, you know.
Sure.
Yes.
Maybe as a way around this, because I know what's coming. He's worried about the expense of all of this. I'm not a great lover of these e-cards because they go into my spam and I put them there deliberately because I don't like them. Would it be possible for the committee actually to agree a charity and actually buy Christmas cards off a charity and send them out? Because at least that way the expenditure will actually be beneficial to someone, you know, and just another way of benefiting somebody from that expenditure.
Can I suggest we don't send Christmas cards? Really radical. Are people waiting up for our Christmas cards?
Or an e-card at least. There's no cost even.
Okay, well, are you content that we perhaps ask the clerk just to explore the cost and the options around charity cards and so on as well, and come back to us next week? Maybe cancel Christmas?
Yes. Some parts of it. Unnecessary, but...
Okay. Okay. Moving then to the draft minutes of the meeting on the 12th of November. Are members content that's an accurate reflection? Okay.
Right, the minutes of the last meeting, there was no mention, or am I imagining this, that, just to check, there was a statement out last week from the Minister about Irish medium youth service. Did we have discussed that at the last meeting, or was it just that there was a statement arrived or a press release that day?
It was the Irish Medium Post-Primary report, and there was a departmental response. I don't remember.
There was a statement that put out last Thursday where he also announced that he was giving an extra £130,000 to Irish medium youth service, and it was on the back of that report. And it just occurred to me, if one child in 100 is educated in an Irish medium school, you take 130,000 and scale that up, that's £13 million, proportionately, for other children in terms of youth provision. What is that money to be spent on? What was the business case for it? What's the justification? Is it an appropriate amount? Can we just query that? Just seemed odd to suddenly, out of the blue, we're talking about how you allocate budgets, but this seems to be rather a good example of ad hocery.
Okay, members content that we get some more information with regards to that. Okay, thank you. Moving then again to matters arising, we have our regard to our inquiry. Just to note a response from Parenting NI following the briefing on the 5th of November. And also the SkyDrive Pro link includes further submissions to our inquiry. So if members content then that material then is published on the committee's website. The Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme, we have a cover note from the clerk at page 128, and if you're happy to further note information from some of the teaching unions just in respect of the scheme, this information was considered at our informal meeting with the unions yesterday, so if you're content again to note that. Now we are just very slightly behind our time, but if we move forward then to our briefing for the inquiry into shared and integrated education, just refer you to Clark's cover note at page 138, then to relevant papers including NICIE's original submission to the inquiry and a further submission responding to other evidence to the inquiry. And we've also got some pen portraits of each of the witnesses. And we also have some additional handouts which are just coming around to you now. The clerk has advised yesterday that NICIE's 2013-14 financial report has been laid in the business office, and just to remind and advise you that as this is part of our inquiry, that this session will be recorded by Hansard. And can I welcome our witnesses? We have Noreen Campbell, who's the Chief Executive of NICIE, Helen McLaughlin, Vice Chairperson of NICIE, and Frances Donnelly, who's Senior Development Officer. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to come this morning. And can I invite you to make an opening statement, and members will follow up with some questions.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank the committee for initiating this inquiry. I think you'd agree the volume of responses and the public debate generated confirms that this is an area of utmost interest. I want to thank you for giving the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education the opportunity to present to you both through written submissions and this morning, and hopefully we'll be able to offer some solutions which you'll want to question us about. I'm Noreen Campbell, I'm Chief Executive of NICIE, and I was previously Principal of Hazelwood Integrated College in North Belfast. My colleagues this morning are Helen McLaughlin, who's a Management Consultant, a parent of an integrated pupil and Vice Chairperson of NICIE, and Frances Donnelly, who's a Senior Development Officer in NICIE and who is also a parent of integrated pupils. And Helen's going to start this morning.
Okay. Thank you. I would echo what Noreen says. Thank you for inviting us here this morning, and we're here very much in a spirit of trying to help with the inquiry and to answer your questions as best we can in that spirit. As Noreen said, I am the Vice Chair of NICIE, and I'm also the parent of a child who attends Rowendale Integrated Primary School. And just before we came in here this morning, we had some very good news, which is that today the development proposal that Rowendale submitted some months ago has been approved. So just by chance, before we walked in here, we've had that really good news. And it's really as a parent of Rowendale as well as Vice Chair of NICIE that I'll be talking to you today. I want to say a bit first about my own education. I come from a Catholic background, and I went to a fantastic Catholic school with wonderful teachers and great friends, lifelong friends. One day a group of Quakers came along to our school and created opportunities for us to get together with kids from local Protestant schools. It was a lot of fun. It was very contrived. It had to be made to happen. And it didn't have a lot of impact except to make me realise what was missing from my otherwise wonderful education, which was children from the other community and indeed other communities. When I became a parent, I knew then that I wanted my child to go to an integrated school. Now, my parents, at that stage being, slightly older Catholic parents, had some questions about what that actually meant. And I know as a committee you're interested in definitions of integrated education. They were very interested in what did that mean for their grandson. And my father asked a question which has really stuck with me, which I think is an excellent question. He said, how will he be taught the difference between right and wrong if there is no faith-based ethos in the school? I thought that was a great question. And although they never said it, I know that they also had questions about what will happen about sacramental education, preparation for First Communion, those sorts of things. And I feel very proud of how Rowendale has answered their questions. Not just in words, but in their actions. And it's really in talking to you about how Rowendale dealt with those issues that I hope to get across to you what integrated education actually means. Its definition, I suppose, in very practical terms. In terms of the difference between right and wrong, before you get through Rowendale school gate, there is a sign that greets you, and it tells you what the school's value base and ethos is. What its sense is of right and wrong. The first line of the sign says, we are integrated, we nurture every child in the values of their own background. Our aim is to enrich individual identity through the understanding of other beliefs. And so it goes on. We are anti-bias, we are all ability, we are democratic, and so on. So, in answer to my father's question about right and wrong, my child's education is steeped in a very strong value base, based on equality, diversity and respect, and perhaps even more importantly, on parity. In a faith-based school, there are also strong values, of course, but alongside that, there are clear messages about which faith takes precedence in the school, through the symbols and iconography and practices in the school. And even where faith schools claim to be mixed, to the children from the minority community, there can be no mistaking what the dominant tradition is. In an integrated school, your background is entirely valued, and your friend's different background is entirely valued. No background is dominant, and no background has to be silent. And this is what we mean by parity in an integrated school. As regards the sacraments, and I think this speaks to how integrated schools deal with identity. Sometimes there's a bit of a perception that you have to leave your identity or background at the door in an integrated school, and that's really not the case. My son was prepared for his first communion in his integrated school, and in fact I would say his communion experience was multiplied and intensified by doing it at an integrated school. What made the day amazing and unforgettable for me, and very striking for my parents, was that once all the wee Catholic children had made their first communion in church and had returned to the school for a party, who was the party hosted by? By the parents and children who hadn't been involved in the church ceremony. In other words, the party was hosted by the Protestant mummies and daddies and children, and indeed mummies and daddies and children from other backgrounds. It was pretty overwhelming for myself and my family, and I felt that my child's background and culture was celebrated not just by and with his own side, but by the whole community. A totally enriched and enriching experience. Now that said, you could ask why don't more children then go to integrated schools? But we were very lucky as parents. Before we had a school-aged child, local parents wanted to choose an integrated education for their child, and they couldn't because there wasn't an integrated school in Moira. So they did all the hard work of setting the school up. Indeed, in the face of fierce opposition, it was quite a battle. It would have been very easy to miss the fact that there is a departmental statutory duty to encourage and facilitate integrated education. How many parents who want a state education or a faith education for their children are left to go and set it up themselves, and many parents have the knowledge and skills to set up a school from scratch. I hope just very briefly in this talk I've defined what integrated education means to me and my family. I'm not here today to say that integrated schools are better than everyone else, or that other schools aren't good schools, that they don't want the best for their children. Of course they do. And we face challenges in the integrated movement, and sometimes we get it wrong, just like other schools. But for me, the single thing that defines integrated education and makes it different is that we deliberately and on purpose strive to educate children from different community backgrounds together all day, every day, and we work deliberately and consciously with those children to celebrate all identities in a spirit of parity. My son's friendships are mixed. without any contrivances with kids from the other community and other communities all day, every day. No one has to invent or pay for a special project to make it happen. That is what integrated schools do. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask Francis to talk a little bit about the intersection between integrated and shared education.
Thank you, Noreen. I suppose when looking at our involvement and the integrated sector's involvement in shared education, just my reference point for the few words that I'm going to say is that the definition of shared education provided by the Ministerial Advisory Group, which was involving 2 or more schools from different sectors, working in collaboration with the aim of delivering educational benefits, promoting efficient and effective use of resources, and promoting equality of opportunity, respect for diversity and community cohesion, as it's slightly abbreviated. But those 3 key areas, the education benefits, economic and societal benefits. Integrated schools exist first and foremost to be good schools, excellent schools. Why else would any of us as parents send our children to a school? And also with strong connections to local communities. So consequently, they recognise the education and economic benefits immediately of sharing with and learning from others. This is simply a good educational approach, and it's second nature to integrated schools. The societal benefits of sharing, and arguably they're the most difficult to achieve in any shape or form, but in an integrated school they're realised at every level within the structure of the school itself. This doesn't make managing diversity any less challenging. That's the same across all sectors, but it does provide a platform for community relations all day, every day. And so therefore our schools are uniquely placed to promote active community cohesion. The ETI evaluation report for the shared education projects funded by the International Fund for Ireland noted that the longer term aim for all schools is for shared education to be so integral to the ethos and fabric of each school community that it becomes the way we do things around here. And I think in regard to community relations, this is the starting point for integrated schools. It's not a long-term goal. That's simply where we come from, and it is the way we do things in integrated schools. In terms of the wider shared education, we have schools that are active participants in the area learning communities. In many cases have taken a lead role in working with those communities, and also they provide recognisable neutral venues and safe spaces almost for activities and events. We've had a number of schools submit proposals for the shared education campus, namely Hazelwood, Sperrin and North Coast Integrated College. We have been disappointed that none of our schools, the integrated schools, have made it through the first tranche, and that is a great source of disappointment and surprise as well. We feel they were very strong and robust proposals, and therefore NICIE certainly would ask for clarification about the process for the shared education campus and reassurance really that comments from the local education library board can't unduly influence the outcome of that process. Certainly integrated schools play a full role and will continue to do so in trying to achieve the shared education targets, but we are entitled, I think, to full recognition as full partners in that, and indeed special recognition particularly in terms of that societal sharing and the contribution that integrated schools make. In relation to NICIE itself, and I just pick out a couple of specific shared education projects that we've been able to contribute to and I think make great advances with. And these were projects supported by IFI and Atlantic Philanthropies. One of these was hosted by NICIE itself, and that was the Sharing Classrooms Deepening Understanding, or Deepening Learning, sorry. And that project really recognised that in terms of the entitlement framework and shared education, the context in which a lot of post-primary teachers are delivering courses is changing, and the mixed classes, more diverse environments. But that can give great uncertainty to teachers. It can make them feel very vulnerable and it can make them feel very uncomfortable. That shouldn't come as any surprise. It's a consequence of our segregated education system and our teacher training. And it's also something we recognised with teachers coming new into the integrated sector. So our project worked very much in supporting those teachers in terms of professional development. We supported bespoke training. We offered accredited training for these teachers, and really encouraging teachers to go through their own journey of exploration of diversity, which often they've never had any opportunity to do so before, because it is only by encouraging our teachers to go through their own journey that they can fully support young people in going through the equivalent. That project remains really important to us. In NICIE, the funding has stopped, but the work continues and has gone into other initiatives, which Noreen will speak about in a couple of minutes. But certainly it raises critical issues around our teacher training and the teachers that are going out into schools which are completely different to what they were a number of years before, certainly in regard to delivering entitlement framework. The second project was the Primary Integrating Enriching Education project, which was hosted by North Eastern Education Library Board. Some of you may already be slightly familiar with that. I believe North Eastern Board presented on that a while ago. And this focused on small rural primary schools, controlled and maintained, developing sustainable relationships. And I think that's one of the key words in all of this debate, is the sustainability of sharing, not the one-off projects, but something that makes or develops an interdependency. And certainly that was our experience, or my personal experience, because I was a NICIE seconded officer into PI. And that was over 4 years, 28 schools and partnerships, really, really important sustainable relationships. The one thing I found in PI and the one thing I find in integrated education is parents are much more open to sharing than I think we give them credit for. Parents want sharing, they want it wholeheartedly, and they know when they're being shortchanged in terms of sharing. I think they're open to new and innovative ideas, and I think we should trust our parents more in this process going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. Okay, my colleagues have outlined the key characteristics of shared education and integrated education, but both approaches are a response to our divided system. Integrated education was developed to challenge segregation in education. Shared education operates within the segregated system. It creates connections between schools of different types, which are typified by being of a dominant or single identity. In integrated schools, sharing is the daily norm. You'll not be surprised if this morning I concentrate on integrated education and why the duty imposed on government to encourage and facilitate it should be respected and should be implemented. To do so will allow us as a society to move beyond segregation to an integrated system of education, and I emphasise integrated with a small e, one fit for purpose for the 21st century. And what would such an integrated system look like? Well, first of all, it would be made up of the schools which are integrated in law, as we have at the moment 62 such schools, and we have at the moment 4 additional schools looking to join that group of schools through the process of transformation. But this system would also include schools who are integrated in ethos. They may be Catholic or controlled in management type, but they would, through their daily experience of their children, have moved beyond a dominant ethos to one which is an ethos of equality which characterises an integrated school. NICIE has developed a programme which we are calling Positive Partnerships for Integration to support those schools that wish to recognise the diversity of their students and who wish to move away from a dominant ethos to one which respects and has an ethos of equality for all. We've consulted fully with all stakeholders when we were developing this. We consulted with CCMS and the Catholic Commission. We consulted with the ELBs and with the various political parties. We're ready to start this programme. We have schools interested in participating in this programme, but we don't have the funding to do so. Under our proposed shift from a segregated system to an integrated system, faith schools and control schools would continue to exist, but they would be obliged to connect their students through shared education in a meaningful way. Such a change in system would allow us to reimagine ourselves as a society which is not defined by difference. Why do we need this step change, and why are we in NICIE calling for structural and systemic reform? We do so for societal reasons. If we want to move beyond division, we must address the division of our children. This division is not a result of parental choice, but is a legacy of our history and divided past. This segregation replicates and perpetuates division. Until now, no one has seriously engaged with the part played by our schools in keeping children separate and normalising for our children a non-thinking acceptance of the other and of division. Our children deserve better. We can and should no longer assume that children at birth inherit a green or orange identity. Moreover, we argue the status quo is not an option. I included in NICIE's second submission a chart which was taken from monitoring the peace process report, and it showed the demographic shift between our two major traditions. Are we content to see Catholic schools taking an increasing share of the system as the population changes? We argue this is not a recipe for a peaceful, inclusive society. There are sound educational reasons for change. Children learn best when they feel accepted. Too many of our children are asked to leave part of their identity at the school door. I would argue there is no classroom in any school in Northern Ireland where the children are the same, whatever it says on the badge on the door. We do a disservice to our children and their emergent sense of self when we presume an identity for them. There are strong economic reasons for reform. Our economic situation is dire. It's been calculated that £80 million a year could be saved by removing the duplication that characterises our system. This money would be better spent in tackling educational underachievement than in keeping children separate. The underpinning principle of our system is supposed to be parental choice. In all major public opinion polls, parents tell us they would prefer to see their children educated together. The majority of our integrated schools are oversubscribed and in some cases have not been allowed to grow. And in a great number of areas, there is no choice of an integrated school. This is a situation which must be rectified. NICIE argues that we can no longer defer reform. The debate stimulated by this inquiry supports our conclusion. The question is, how can reform be achieved? For that reason, we've called for a patent-style inquiry, which would be tasked with the reformation of our education system. But in addition to that, there are some steps we think can be taken immediately which would support the dismantling of the segregated system and the creation of an integrated system. The first is to do with planning, and we're calling for a level playing field in planning. There is no planning authority to test and provide for parental choice in integrated education. Parents are expected to initiate transformation of their schools or to set up new schools. If I'm a Catholic parent and I want a Catholic school, then CCMS will have provided a choice of such schools for me, and similarly with the ELBs and control schools. If I'm a parent who would like an integrated school and my local school is oversubscribed or there is no integrated school, I am expected to go to the local single identity school. We think this is an outrageous situation, and we think that the time has come where the human rights of parents to have an integrated education, to see their children educated together, are respected. For that reason, we are arguing that the ELB, the new ELB, must accept its responsibility under the Education Order of 1986 and must plan to ensure there is sufficient integrated choice in every area. Area-based planning must be responsive to this and must test for parental demand. We also think there's an argument for looking at the issue of ownership of schools, albeit this might be one that would be left to a patent-style inquiry because it would be controversial. We have a unique and complicated system of ownership, with its roots going back into the last century. Only controlled schools are owned by the state. Grammar schools, Catholic schools, grant-maintained integrated schools are owned by the trustees of the schools, but yet all are equally in receipt of government funds. Now, this can cause difficulties for local communities, and that was evidenced in the recent Clinty Clay School controversy. A single system of ownership would help move us to an integrated or unified system of education. Equally, we have, I think I counted 10 different systems of boards of governance in our schools. There's no reason for that whatsoever. And if we had a uniform system of governance across our schools, that ought not to impact on the ethos of the school, but it would at least begin the process of unifying our system of education and moving towards a cohesive system which will provide a world-class education. There's the issue of teacher training. The recent International Review Panel on Teacher Training argued that maintaining the status quo of segregation at this level was not an option, and proposed a range of solutions to creating an integrated system of teacher education. Unless we educate our trainee teachers together, we will not effectively deliver on shared education. There's the issue of preschool education, and this can be tackled easily. Preschool education is supposed to be non-sectoral, and yet our nurseries and our nursery units are often seen as being denominational or single identity. DE should only fund those nursery units and schools which are genuinely and overtly open to all. NICIE believes that change is necessary, and we believe that change is possible. Nelson Mandela said, "No one is born hating one another because of the colour of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Our schools should be places where children can learn to love, where we can inculcate acceptance and respect of the other, and where we can cherish difference and diversity." The findings of this inquiry and any recommendations coming from it are important. You have the power to remove education from the political arena. You can shift the focus in education to what is best for children and best for future society. Thank you for your attention, and we're pleased to take questions.
And thank you very much for your presentation. It's actually probably quite surprising for us as committee members, but the submissions that we've received have prompted quite heated discussion in the press, and perhaps some of it hasn't been particularly edifying either. But could you maybe explain as to why it has become so controversial whenever, for us, certainly for myself, shared education is a very simple concept?
Okay, I think there's been different levels of controversy in the press, and so certainly in NICIE we felt the CCMS challenge to remove Article 64 was controversial, and we felt that that was not helpful in getting the benefit of this committee, which we see as being a very positive tool for people coming together to find solutions to a better system for the future. So our position in NICIE is that we don't see shared education here and integrated education there. It's not an either or, it's an and. We have a model of full immersion sharing, which is integrated. We have a system of major division, and shared education recognises that there is a right and a need for young people to connect, and shared education is a mechanism for doing that. So we want to work with shared education to ensure that that mechanism is meaningful and is strong, but equally we want to say that we need to move away from segregation, and we need to allow schools to recognise the diversity and the change in identity of their children, and to become integrated in ethos. Now, there will be always some schools who will say, no, we want a dominant ethos, which is faith-based or single identity, and those are the schools that will benefit best from shared education. But many schools will say, no, in every our classroom there's any number of different types of children. Let's explore how we can recognise that, how we can be recognised for the work we're doing in that, but not change our ownership of our school or our management structure or our management type.
But it would appear that you've been maybe a little dismissive of the concept of shared, and even in the comments that you made today, you said that shared operates in the segregated system. But could you not recognise that perhaps that sharing is as much as some communities will give at this stage, and that something is better than nothing?
Oh, we absolutely accept that something is better than nothing, totally. And I think, Francis outlined, we've actually had quite a significant input into shared education, and we have worked within it, and we encourage all our schools to work within it. In our Positive Partnerships initiative, it's actually based on sharing as well. So I wouldn't want to be dismissive of shared education, but I do think there is a critical point. Shared education is working within the system we have, And I don't think the system we have is fit for purpose for the 21st century, and I think the system has to change. So shared education is, and hopefully will develop, as a very useful mechanism for connecting young people. There are big challenges to that in terms of how you ensure that there is long-term, meaningful connection of young people across sectors. But if those can be overcome, that will definitely be of benefit. But it's not enough in itself.
Do you feel threatened by shared education?
No, I think actually we welcome shared education because we think it really has put a focus and it's brought right back up to the public's attention what is important in education. And I think when the public were asked the question, as they were in a poll in the Belfast Telegraph 2 weeks ago, about their understanding of shared education and integrated education, the public were very clear that integrated education was children being educated together on a daily basis, and 64% of them said that that was actually the option they preferred. And they also clearly understood that shared education was children or schools sharing resources across the divide, and that was within the system. So there is a critical difference there. But we're not saying that that's the reason not to support shared education or shared initiatives, and we're encouraging integrated schools to be part of those.
Okay. Just to look at the comments that you made in your paper around area planning, and you feel it in some way that has perhaps limited the progress of the integrated education sector. Now, we've had previous representation from Professor Knox and Brewer, and they would claim there are issues around academic attainment in the integrated schools by comparison to those in non-integrated schools. Is it not the case that parents, perhaps, I mean, you've said that with regards to surveys and so on, that the parents would like their children to be in a shared experience, but is the priority perhaps not that they want their children to be at schools where they can excel and there's a higher level of attainment?
Okay, I think there are two distinct issues there, but let me begin with the latter one. First of all, I expect most people around this table are parents, and we absolutely, our duty is to put our children first and ensure that we can ensure they have the best education possible for them. Now, there is no integrated school would have survived for a nanosecond was it not able to give that assurance to parents. And we have 62 schools, and there is a range across those 62 schools. And I think the focus generally is on post-primary, because there you have very hard measurements to look at, and people can look and say, oh, there's where they are or they aren't. Some of our schools are doing extremely well. Some of them aren't doing as well as they should be. We're totally committed to supporting schools to improve their performance for their young people, because we think that is what schools are about. They're ensuring young people can take their place in the world and fulfil all their objectives. But we did a comparison. A lot of our integrated schools have just come through inspections, and over the last 3 years we looked at the inspection reports and we tested those against the Chief Inspector's report. And, for example, in our primary schools, where teaching and learning are good or better, the Northern Ireland average is 82%, but for integrated primary schools, it's 96%. So for the 25 out of 26 primary schools who were inspected, teaching and learning was deemed to be good or better. None of those primary schools were deemed to have poor management. 96% of integrated primary schools were assessed as having pastoral care that was very good or outstanding, and the Chief Inspector outlined there was a clear correlation between good achievement and high quality pastoral care. In our post-primary schools, 68% were rated good or better for overall effectiveness, and the Northern Ireland average there is 63%. 92% were rated good or better for pastoral care, and that again was above the Northern Ireland average. And our English and Maths and our 5 good GCSEs compare favourably. I think that a figure that you'll be interested in, and which we would like to do a wee bit more work in getting the statistics in. If you look at the performance of integrated schools compared to other schools, i.e. controlled and Catholic schools together, so the number of young people who are getting 5 good GCSEs, including English and Maths, our total is 38% compared to 34.5% for the others. But I think the more interesting one is at free school meals, and our focus, the whole focus of the Chief Inspector's report was on free school meals and underachievement of working class boys in particular. There's a very striking difference because in integrated schools, our boys on free school meals, 24.5% of them are achieving 5 good GCSEs, and that's significantly better than boys in either Catholic or controlled schools. So we are getting some things right, but some things right, we're always conscious of the need to get things better, and we're committed totally to getting things better. I don't know if that answers your question on the academic. I do want to make, because you connected that with area-based planning and the lack of the numbers of people choosing integrated schools. There is no central planning for integrated education. Historically, our schools, 40 of our schools, were set up by parents' groups. Parents themselves had to get together across the divide, which wasn't necessarily easy, and had to create those schools. In the first 10 years, they had to get the funding and the money to create those schools. They had to face enormous barriers to do so. I think that speaks of the success of our schools, because there was such deep roots embedded in those schools by parents. Another 22 schools went through the process of transformation, where parents again said, or in some cases boards of governors, we want our school to change, we want our school to become integrated. And that isn't an easy process, as the parents in Clinty Clay have discovered, because there are still obstacles. Now, if I'm a parent who wants a controlled school for my child, I can go out and I can look, and the ELB will have said, oh, we need X number of schools here, and there will be a choice of schools. Similarly for Catholic schools. So why should the parent who wants an integrated education, which is after all the norm of the type of education across the world, why should they have to be the ones who create that for themselves? To me, that is the absolute opposite of facilitating and encouraging integrated education. We think area-based planning has made the situation worse, because despite the Minister saying we want area-based planning to be for areas, not sectors, individuals, not institutions, we want innovative solutions, what has happened instead is CCMS have managed and planned for the Catholic side, and the ELBs have managed and planned for the controlled side, and nobody is managing planning for the integrated side. And yes, we now do, after lobbying, have a place at the table, but nobody will accept responsibility for planning. And we think actually if the new ELB accepts that responsibility, which does sit under the 1986 Act, that will make a significant difference. And we think it's significant that actually Irish Medium, in the review of Irish Medium, the Minister accepted the recommendations and at the same time said he would support a similar type of review of strategic planning for integrated education. And that review actually puts at the heart of it who is responsible for planning for Irish medium education, who is responsible for testing parental demand, and who is responsible for removing the barriers. We want the same for integrated education. We want a level playing field.
But just to link it back to the question, whenever we were talking, you mentioned obviously oversubscription, but your oversubscription is really only limited to a small number of successful schools.
You know, all our schools have out of 62 schools, I might be out one or two. They're all oversubscribed except 7.
But of course, then you do have an advantage over perhaps the controlled and the maintained with regards to the transport advantage.
Well, I think the transport advantage works in favour of different people in different ways. I think my point is that there are 62 schools in 62 areas, but there are a vast number of areas where there's no integrated choice at all. And that's what we should be focusing on, making sure that parents have that choice.
Okay, I'll return to some questions because other members have indicated. But just in the meantime, can I welcome the pupils from Christ the Redeemer Primary School? You're very welcome to committee this morning, and members of the committee will meet with you after we've completed our session here. So thank you very much for attending today. Mr. Hazard?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. Can I just start perhaps around language? I think some of the language used is inflammatory on all sides of this. I want to focus on the word segregation and segregated. I don't think it's applicable to the situation. To To segregate, in my mind, is to, and the definition in here, even in front of me, is to actively and predeterminedly separate, the physical act of separating. However, I think our system allows for parents to choose. Even in this document here that NICIE have produced, it says there will be an integrated college with a reasonable distance from your home. Now, if that had said there may not be an integrated college from a reasonable distance from in your home, then I think there may be grounds perhaps to look at, well, if the choice isn't there. I think if you take someone sitting at home who chooses to send their child to a particular school and you actively accuse them of being a segregationist, I think that's wrong. I think you need to look at the use of the word segregate and segregation. I don't think that reflects. Is there, if you want to talk about duplication or replication or something else, there may be grounds. I think segregated is a loaded term.
Okay, can I say, and I'm sorry I'm hogging this now, but actually segregated is a loaded term, and it really touches to the heart of this debate. We don't like the word. Absolutely we don't. But interestingly, we talk about segregated housing and it doesn't seem to have the same emotive impact on us. And we talk about segregated education and we feel really unhappy because we don't want to think we're keeping our children divided. But yet our children, 92% of them, go to schools which are majority one or the other. And one of the definitions of segregation is the keeping of people apart. Now, there are historical reasons for this. And, I think we just need to say we've had a history, and the history has shaped a particular type of educational system. But now we're in a different place. Let's find means. And if I use the word this morning, let's create an integrated system of education with a small I, I'm more than happy to say, give us a different word. Let it be a unified system of education. Let's find a word. This is something I think where this committee could really play a part in. If we don't want segregated, duplicated, whatever word we use, system of education, then what system of education do we need? What do we call it? And how do we get there? And I think that is really where the value of this committee comes in helping us chart. We are actually charting our way from one point to another. And this committee is actually leading the way in having this debate. So, and we don't want to feel that we play in a negative part in it. So if we've done so, then I have to apologise for that, because we really want to be part of the solution and we want to find a means, and I suppose we want to model our integrated values, which are about listening, learning, understanding. And if we fail, then, we have to learn from that ourselves as well. But I do believe there's something about that word and the way it touches at our core that tells us we need to look at it more closely. And we don't want it. If we don't want it, how then do we make sure it can never be used to describe us, and how can we make sure people looking in on us from outside don't say, oh, they're segregated by religion in their education, which is what they do.
No, but, and it's positive to hear that you're taking that on board, and the same question will be put to others, so be rest assured of that. Obviously somewhere where there was segregation, obviously was racial segregation in the United States of America. However, when schools came together, results didn't necessarily improve because the schools weren't socially integrated, and very often I find that the integrated movement here focuses solely on religious and ethnic integration. Now, I know it doesn't, in practice, but even when you read in the definitions, always about religion. It's always Catholic and Protestant or other. We never sell the advantages of social integration as well, to having poor kids and kids from affluent backgrounds and everything else. Now, I know integrated schools do that, but what I'm saying is they don't sell it. When it comes to the big argument, it's always about the cohesiveness of our society about Catholics and Protestants. It's not about the other divisions in society. So what I'm saying is, I feel when we talk about integration or shared, we need to make sure that we look at socioeconomic sharing and integration as well. Do you also agree with that, and is that important?
Yeah, I do agree with it, and I actually think something that you say kind of touches something that we've thought about a lot in the last couple of years, which is, you mentioned the word kind of how you sell it, or how we kind of sell ourselves. the social mixing and the all-ability mixing is something that we very much strive for. I often use the word strive because I don't think we ever get it perfect, but we strive. And social mixing is a huge part of that. And I know, in my son's school, you can see that. You can see the all-ability. But I think that you're right when we come into, I suppose, the kind of public debate, because where this had its roots was, I suppose, looking at we're educating Catholics and Protestants separately in this country. That has remained a real core kind of driving force for it. And it may be that when we come into public debate, we go back to talking about that. And we even have to remind ourselves always to say, yes, our divisions are very much based on Catholic Protestant, but actually now we have to take account of the fact there's other communities as well, and other language groups and other ethnic groups and all of that. But yes, that is a huge part of what we do as well. Yeah.
Can I come in? I think it's also worth noting that the integrated sector, such as status, is actually defined in legislation. So if our language is about Protestant and Catholic, it's also related to the fact that by law an integrated school is defined in such a way, reasonable numbers of Catholic and Protestant. The other factors, of course, are important. And it's an ongoing debate we've had with the Department of Education in terms of people now identify themselves in many ways, whether they're active churchgoers, whether they're culturally Protestant, culturally Catholic, whether they're newcomers. And this whole idea of having to have numbers and balance is part of the integrated ethos, but it also can be very confining as well and doesn't always reflect the changing society in which we live.
Just one final question, and I know there has been great work, I think, across the board in the integrated sector on the issue of cultural awareness, and certainly when it comes to those who maybe had a fear before that their Irish identity and their Irish cultural identity was never reflected within an integrated school, and that a shared situation. We've heard before some shared examples where schools come together and they play Gaelic football, whatever it might be. Can you give us a flavour of how the integrated sector has looked to embrace or to promote Irish culture? And I am aware, again, in this, for example, there is no Irish in this, and to my mind, looking at all them pictures, there's no pictures of even Gaelic football or hurling or anything in any of this. There's plenty of rugby and soccer. Again, I know you are working on it, but I would love to know how far you still think you have to go.
Can I chip in a small example, and then I really have to hand over then to yourselves. Just in my son's school, for example, they've now started to offer Irish language teaching. So that's a new thing, and that's through having a member of staff who's able to offer that, which is fantastic. And there would be a good awareness of things like, and I mean, it sounds like a very kind of cliched way to do it, but celebrating St Patrick's Day and looking at what that's all about and what that means for people and so on. And that leads to discussions about, Irishness around the world and all of that sort of thing. So just on a school level, I'm starting to even see more of that. He's year 5 now. I'm starting to see more of that in the last few years. But I'll maybe hand over for a bigger picture to my colleagues, if I can.
Well, again, our schools were established to ensure parity of esteem and to ensure everybody felt included and accepted, and that meant ensuring as far as possible, and I think Helen has touched on one, sometimes it does come down to whether you have a teacher available or not who can offer a particular subject. But certainly in post-primary schools they would all have their Gaelic team and their soccer team, and maybe if they're big enough also have a rugby team. Most schools will offer, post-primary schools will offer Irish in some shape. It may be in taster classes, or it may be as in Shimna, which is a specialist language college, where in fact I was following them on Facebook and they were having some sort of talkathon in Irish. I'm not quite sure. I should have been able to say that in Irish, but I can't. So there are different, but the commitment there is to ensure that people feel accepted and have access to their culture, and they can bring their culture into school. And it's not just about Irish culture, it's about the culture of every child in the school. So it's really important. Our integrated schools, for example, I think the Remembrance Day assemblies are particularly poignant because you have there this recognition of something which can be controversial outside, where you'll have some children and some staff wearing poppies and some not, and yet you will have them coming together to have this really meaningful assembly where people are remembering our own local past as well as the greater wars. And it's the conversations that are held among the young people when they prepare for those which are important. It's about a young person being able to say, well, actually, yes, I do belong to the Orange Lodge, or my family always have, and therefore this is why it's important to me, and this is what we do and how we celebrate it. If I give you an example from my own experience, in my school we had what we called a Speak Your Peace Day, and we developed this in response to the situation around the Holy Cross, where tensions were so high in North Belfast, and we felt we had to create a space where our young people could really be themselves and understand each other. And it was for the Year 10 group, and they were asked to bring in a symbol which was important to them. And then they sat around in small groups and they talked about their symbol and why it was important. Now, to sit in those groups and see on the table what were not paramilitary flags, what were national flags, what were harps that might have been carved in Long Kesh, what might have been guitars and skateboards, because of course a lot of children, their symbols that are important to them are their immediate ones, and to listen to those young people talk, explain what this meant to them and their family, and then to hear their friends' interpretation of their symbol. It was the most powerful experience, because there you had really true learning. There you had total acceptance that people are different, come from different places, that we have been a divided society, and yet that capacity to learn from each other and show respect to each other.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kinnan.
Thank you, and thank you very much. I'm sorry to have nipped out. I have loads of questions, but they all really come down to one thing: is what change in legislation would you like to see from an integrated point of view? And the reason I ask it is from 2 or 3 different points of view. Is there's always you have a preferred position in many cases to other schools, which leads to problems where you've got, I would say, a really good controlled school, which is as good as integrated because it's got large numbers and mixtures, and because you're in a preferred position, one of your schools can expand at the cost of another, when in fact we've already got an integrated school there, but run in a slightly different way. So one angle is the conflict in some areas, because it's not always the same. The other then comes down to how you teach religion and or politics within the schools as well. I mean, I love the story you just told me now. That's what I want to see happening everywhere. But you've got different angles that come to that in different patches, in that I think in Hazelwood, if I remember rightly, when the Catholic are learning about the Catholic religion, what are the others doing, and is it the same all the way through? Do we need to change legislation to make it so it's more comparative, so everyone's learning about everyone's religions and not just the main two? Anyway, there's enough in there, I'm afraid.
Do you want, as a parent, to talk about the religious education?
Well, in terms of religious education, there is an agreed curriculum in Northern Ireland. It's been agreed by the 4 main churches in terms of how that's delivered in primary schools and integrated schools. Those children who require sacramental preparation, they have added, or whatever the school wishes to do it, whether it's children are pulled out for additional, where they're all taught together. There's a variety of methods, but there is an agreed curriculum. In terms of my children's experience going through an integrated primary school, they both went through preparation, but very much their experience in religion was about being with children who were different and learning about different religions, and that's gone over into post-primary as well. I think from just my colleague in NICIE, who has more of a religious education background, I think we'd like to see probably more of an emphasis on the world religions as well, so that we do have this Christian basis, of course, but I think there is an argument that all children should be exposed to a greater experience of different kinds of religions.
So I think that I think also NICIE in the past has developed a programme called Delving Deeper, which enables children from different Christian denominations to look into the common Christianity and to what they share, and to deepen understanding between them. But certainly at post-primary level, as well as the curriculum which is taught in every school with regards to religion, our integrated schools would all also invest time in other faiths so that children have that broad global awareness, and we see that very important, particularly as more different faiths come into Northern Ireland. Your other question, though, which is about area planning. I think if the problem with area planning is that it's based on sectors and sectoral thinking, and as such, it challenges us into ways of thinking about either or. Whereas the aim of area-based planning was to say, this is an area, how do we best meet the needs of all the children in this area? Shared education, by the way, has a very valuable role to play in that in terms of collaboration. So it's how you balance then where a parent might want a very specific single identity type of education, or whether or not the parents want an integrated education. So your very good control school might say, well, in our school, we know we have 20% children from a Catholic background, we know we have 10% newcomers, we know we're a diverse school, so let us represent that in our ethos. Let us have a look at how we've been in the past, and how can we see, is that an equality, does that show equality for everyone? If not, how can we do it, and how can we have it recognised? So schools aren't in competition with each other. Now, in terms of legislation, one of the big difficulties is the fact that schools have, if you like, by the way their funding, been set up in competition to each other. And if you're a principal in a school, your prime objective will be to your school, not to the other school, no matter how well you get on with them. So there is a conflict there, which is a bigger issue again. If you could have a different system of funding, and if you did have a different system of area-based planning, and if you did open up and invite schools to open up and not be seen as one or the other, then I think you could have a fairly rapid transition to a different unified system of education.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thanks, and thanks for your presentations. When we talk about children coming together in a school from Protestant, Roman Catholic backgrounds, etc., the terms Protestant, Roman Catholic can have a religious connotation, or, and yourselves, you use the word cultural. Sometimes it's another way of speaking about ethno-cultural or cultural differences. But and this is a question that I put to all sectors, not restricted to yourselves. In terms of the rights of children to learn about the culture of their community and the home from which they come, which is part of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, how do you address that? You've given examples there of maybe introducing Gaelic games or some Irish language. How do other traditions, other cultural traditions in Northern Ireland get accommodated, and how is that dealt with?
Well, I think there is space created for all children to bring to the table their cultural experience. Now, for example, a lot of schools would use a programme called Different Drums, where children bring in the drum that represents their identity. They learn the history of it, and then they drum together, and that again is a really powerful experience. We have our remembrance assemblies, where you will have children sharing their experiences and the experiences of their family. So every school will take a slightly different approach to how they ensure that both of our major cultures are represented, because after all that's why we were established, but also our newcomer cultures as well. So that it's one of the, I think, fundamental principles is to find ways and means of.
Sorry,
Yeah, I was just going to add, in terms of, I think the integrated school provides almost the everyday opportunity. So I'm immediately thinking there, for example, the literature that's available in the library, the texts that are used, the poems that are used in terms of English, the drama activities, art activities, music, PE, the speakers that come into the school, the charities that are supported, the community groups that are linked to the school. So it's kind of within the fabric of the school, and there's almost an automatic means by which that happens, because the teachers know that it's an integrated school, and by part of their process in terms of lesson preparation and working with their young people, it almost becomes, it just simply is the way that they are in terms of reflecting the major cultures.
I could maybe just add to that, because NICIE received funding from the Department of Foreign Affairs to mark the centenary of anniversaries, and we use that funding to support teachers in teaching around controversial issues. We use that funding to create a bank of resources across all of those contentious anniversaries, which are available to all schools, and we created some super drama pieces around those, so that schools could actually, through drama, then explore the issues around the signing of the Covenant or the 1916 Rising. So you are getting, and then obviously, because children love talking to each other about these issues, you're getting all that daily interchange as well.
I would just make the observation, in terms of sport, sometimes people draw a parallel between football and Gaelic football. Difference to me there is one has got a specific cultural heritage identity associated with it. It's very specific. The other is just an international game now, and I think finding ways to express other cultural traditions other than Gaelic traditions is something there that it's a thing that maybe needs teased out in a whole range of schools, not just in any sector. Could I just ask a question about another matter, and it's one I struggle with. I can't quite get to the bottom of. There was one of the early schools, I think maybe like in college, that had a motto that they all may be one. Or there was one of the early schools, I think, had that as a motto, which is a Bible text. And it's that issue of is there a place within the system for parents to send their children, if they come from what I would describe as a very conservative, evangelical Protestant background, who may not want to go with a certain interpretation which they would view as of an ecumenical spirit, and they might well feel more comfortable almost with a more secular form of integrated education where those issues are set aside. Are there different views within the integrated sector about that? Because that's a sense that I've had, but I'm not clear on it.
I think there is. I mean, we have a lot of debate internally about how we best develop our schools and develop the ethos in the school and engage. But all of our schools are committed to parental involvement and engagement with parents. And I think that's where a parent who has that background and who wants to test whether they feel that in some way that would be impinged upon by being in an integrated school, then they know they can ask those questions. So I think it's that open dialogue, as Helen said, we're a work in progress.
Yeah. And I think actually, I mean, that is a question that interests me a lot because, increasingly, I think we're a society where, I suppose the integrated movement started, and I think for good reasons, as identifying itself as an integrated movement with a Christian tradition. And I can understand, 30 odd years ago why that was necessary. I do think now there's room within the movement to discuss, to what extent do we carry that forward. I would imagine, just as there's a diversity of Catholic schools, there's a diversity of state schools out there, there's a diversity of integrated schools, that is still very much there, kind of, I suppose, written into the integrated movement. But I think where development happens and where responsiveness to need happens is very much at the coalface with the schools, working with parents, and parents being able to say, I was really surprised that you did that assembly in that way. That didn't really fit with, what I want my children to be exposed to, or, there is room for that debate. And in fairness, and I think within any movement, I would like us within the movement to continue debating it too. So I suppose it's a long way of saying to your question, I think the door is open to addressing those questions. I don't think we would say, no, it has to be this way, and if schools don't do it that way, then they're not in.
Okay, thank you. We have 4 other sets of questions. Ms. Overend.
Thank you, Chair. And it's good to meet you this morning. Thank you for coming. I just really wanted to pursue integrated education is the forced equality of the two religions. what about areas such as Mid Ulster where, you know, they're predominantly predominantly one religion? You know, we heard on the radio this morning them saying you couldn't turn around where you'd meet someone from one particular religion. So, you know, if an integrated school is supposed to be to show equality, what about the surplus? You know, and you know, would a shared partnership, a shared area partnership, not need to receive extra support in that particular area to bring everyone together to, you know, to promote that shared ethos rather than an integrated school? How do you see?
I think areas where you have a predominance of one cultural background on paper,
one religious background,
or cultural religious background on paper, I think you're less likely to get shared education there because you won't have the variety of schools there. So therefore, but maybe, you know, they'll not be the same in an area where you have, you know, a city area where there's a lot of mix. But our argument would be that in an area where there is a majority population, it's more important to have an integrated school because that gives the parity of esteem to the minority. And it's not about numbers. We aspire to the best balance we can, but we aspire and we're totally committed to the ethos of equality of esteem, so that if you're the only child in the school from a particular background, you can feel proud of that background and be accepted. And we think it's really important in Northern Ireland that our areas don't become monocultural, and that we do keep diversity within them, and that therefore through an integrated school we can do that. But also, I think we have an opportunity, again through this committee, to move away from the idea that because we happen to have been born into a particular area or baptised in a particular church, that that is all we are. There are many mixed marriages. Those people in mixed marriages call it double belonging, which I think is a beautiful phrase. But if those children go to a school which is controlled, they're expected to leave the Catholic part of their identity at the door. If they go to a Catholic school, they're supposed to leave the Protestant part. That's not fair. The children of parents who don't have a religion, are the children of parents who don't see themselves necessarily as Irish or British, but see themselves as Northern Irish. There's a huge fluidity amongst young people about how they see themselves and young parents. And I think that's why they say we want to see our children educated together. They don't want to be pigeonholed into the past. So how can we start moving beyond that into a much more fluid type of seeing ourselves, so we're not seeing ourselves as a binary, polarised society, but as a society working to become a unified society?
There are schools that aren't integrated with a big I, that are integrated in all but name, you know, and it's very much felt that those integrated schools then threaten the future of those schools that are less forced integrated, so to speak. But
well, we actually feel, you know, we recognise totally that there are many schools that have the phrase naturally integrated is used, and I think it's actually quite flattering that that phrase is used, because it recognises the importance of young children together. Now, in the recent judicial review, Judge Tracy looked at mixed schools, and he said, are mixed schools the same as integrated schools? And he said, no, they're not the same as integrated schools, because they have a dominant ethos which is based on a single identity. So no matter how welcoming they are to all children, and no matter how supportive they are of all the differences within the school, unless they actually engage with that dominant inherited ethos and say, okay, it may mean we have to do some changes here. It may mean we have to add these books into the library, or we may have to add that subject onto the curriculum. It will definitely mean that we need to train our teachers and support our teachers' thinking in a broader way. And if we can do that, then we would become a school which is integrated in ethos. Now, our programme is to support schools in doing that. We recognise there are schools out there doing great work. We also recognise those schools would like to be recognised and to be able to say we do this work and we are working towards an equality of ethos, and we want to attract children from all areas. So we have a programme package ready to go and all we need is the funding for it to go, which I think will answer a lot of your questions because it's all school-based.
Could I just jump in there? I mean, that question struck a chord with me because it was because of that question, really, that we started to develop the Positive Partnerships for Integration programme, because I think there's really real questions about, what does a school do, if they're in an area where it's mostly single identity population anyway, what do they do if they're a school who feels, well, aren't we integrated anyway because we have, a bit of a mix? And we wanted to develop a programme that really took those opportunities. What the programme would do with a school in either of those situations would be sit down and look at, well, what would it look like if you went through a process to move towards adopting an integrated ethos? What would that look like? How would it help you? What would be the challenges or blockages? And us supporting the whole school community, the school, the governors, the parents, the children, through a process to move towards an integrated ethos, if that is what they would choose to do. And we see that as very much, it's a way of working with schools where they are, rather than, and that you'll note we haven't come along today and said, we want all schools integrated overnight, tonight, do it now. We recognise, we've suggested some means and processes to get there at some point. But this programme would be about recognising sometimes you have to meet schools where they're at and offer them something and work with them.
I think that the programme also offers, if you don't mind me just jumping in, is that acknowledging where schools are at, and also in terms of potentially all the good work that they're already doing, that they want to recognise. So it's adding to rather than taking away. And I think that's a really important element of schools that are transforming and schools looking at integration. It's where you are, acknowledging the good work and some of the difficulties perhaps that may exist, but adding to how does embracing a more integrated ethos contribute to the benefit of your young people.
Okay,
Mr. Hauser, did you want to make a very brief intervention?
Yeah, it was just a very small about the numbers, and you sort of touched on it. You don't need to have a certain amount of numbers. I'm just going to ask, a school of 30, how many of the minority have to be there for it to be an integrated school? Surely you're not suggesting that there doesn't have to be any?
No. First of all, I am convinced in your school of 30, they will not all be the same, no matter the fact that they are in a school with a particular name. So I think you have to create an environment where parents are happy to say who they are and where they come from. That's number one. Number two, the better. We're committed to the best balance. So in our statement of principles, it says 40-40 balance, ideally. Now, that is coming on, and we're reviewing that because, as Helen said, people don't want to be pigeonholed and described like that anymore. But the better your balance, then I think the easier it is to create that open dialogue that allows people to feel accepted and to allow people to shape a school. Because if you have a school which sees itself as Catholic or as controlled, and that's what it's always been, but now it maybe wants to become something different, that doesn't happen overnight. Parents have to have a voice in shaping that. The governors have to have a voice in shaping that. The teachers and the young people. And if you don't have that capacity for people to say, well, actually, this is who I am, whatever that might be, then you cannot move towards that open, integrated ethos. So, yes, you need diversity in a school, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time and we've got 3 more questions. Mr. Lunn.
Well, it's good to have you here. I'm delighted, for the record, to hear about Rowendale, and that the wishes of parents are going to be respected and dealt with down there. I'm actually more interested, Chair, in listening to other people's questions today, because I could ask lots of questions where I already know the answer and I might be accused of prompting an answer, So I'll just ask you one. You've touched on Drumragh just briefly there. In fact, we're well into your presentation before it even got mentioned. Leaving aside the decision that's pending on Drumragh College itself, I mean, how satisfied are you with the Minister's reaction to Judge Tracy's judgment, particularly around planning and the needs model?
I think we're keeping a watching brief is the best way to put that. There is a total commitment on our part and on the integrated movement on a wider basis that we are not going to allow the findings of the judicial review to go unnoticed. So we actually are doing a checklist as to how it's been taken account of. Now, the Minister himself, I think he voted for an amendment you had in the Assembly in support.
We'll talk about that in a moment.
So we took that as a very positive sign, and certainly, when we hear good news of schools being allowed to increase, we take that as a positive sign. We look forward to seeing an inquiry or group being set up to see how we can strategically plan to support integrated education in the way that has been set up for Irish medium. And we would like to see that happen very soon. So yes, we haven't come to an end of term report yet, and the Minister and his response.
Well, just for clarity, the Minister and his party did vote for the Alliance amendment to include the word promote in the definition or in the obligation, but a couple of weeks later, when it came to further consideration, they decided to side with the DUP and vote against it. And that's more. I can see Chris laughing, but I think it's funny too. No, I'll not pursue it, Chairman. I think. Would you agree with me that, in fairness to the Minister, let's try and be fair to him, that since the Drumragh judgement, not before it was made, but before since it loomed up on the horizon, that there may have been a softening of the Minister's attitude in terms of decisions made since. I'm thinking of Millennium, perhaps Rowandale and others, that perhaps he is, and I'm going to give him credit here, he is actually attempting to honour the obligation that he has.
I think that's true, because where we've been disappointed, the Minister has expressly said that he wants the overall provision of integrated education in the area to be looked at as well. So where we've been disappointed, as for example in Portadown, or indeed in Clinty Clay, we're disappointed for the moment, but we're hoping maybe we can get further progress there. The Minister hasn't closed the door, so I think there is a recognition, and I suppose the challenge is for the recognition to permeate down. The judgment said that the Department had to be live to the statutory obligation at all levels, operational and strategic. So if we're seeing that recognition at the strategic level, well, we've got to see it in the operational level, particularly in regard to planning. And that, I think, is the big challenge.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr Newton.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome the members to the committee today. I speak as someone who, I speak as someone, my wife and I chose integrated education. We were very keen to see that happen. We chose Methody as an integrated school, which obviously in your definition it does not meet that criteria. I'm actually a wee bit confused, which isn't hard to do, sometimes I have to tell you. But I'm confused around part of your submission. And it's a paragraph, but I'll read out just, I think, the key points of it. NICIE said, we acknowledge the principle of parental choice. We acknowledge the right of parents to seek faith-based provision. Choice should be accommodated. It should not be used as a prop to maintain a segregated system. It would include single identity and faith schools and schools integrated both by legal status and by being recognised as having an integrated status. And in all schools, you say children with single identities, children in single identity schools should be guaranteed sustained and meaningful shared learning. In saying that, is that not part of the problem, in that where there is always going to be this choice of alternative education systems or approaches, we're never going to move to what really would be a shared educational system? And in moving and creating the integrated system, are you not adding to the problem of getting to a shared education system?
Don't need to.
Yes,
yep,
go ahead,
okay.
please do.
No, I mean, it's an important question, and it's something that struck me since I joined NICIE a few years ago, which was that people saw often integrated education as, an extra sector, and our view would be that, and it is just to take the long view, We don't want integrated education to be another sector jostling amongst sectors. We would ultimately like the standard to be integrated education. And the reason why it is probably easy for us to talk about parental choice and still respecting that is because all the indications we have is that ultimately, and I think if we do the process correctly and in the ways that we've described, we would be able to move to a very largely integrated system with parental choice being respected. And that would not mean that we would be jostling for position, but that we would be helping to support the development of a different system. And it may always be that alongside that mainstream system, there are single faith schools and schools which have different ethoses. And we don't feel it would be appropriate to say that can never be. There can never be a school that has a different ethos from our ethos. But we feel by going with parental choice and working through the correct processes, we will arrive at a system that is largely integrated anyway. We believe that is what parents want, and all the research we've done indicates that.
So, would I be right then in describing that your ambition then is to see the integrated system actually closed down?
We have often, I have certainly said, I don't know, Noreen maybe, I don't know, yes, I have often said there shouldn't need to be a NICIE, because we should have an education system which, I think earlier on you talked about the idea of shared education being really simple. For me, the idea of integrated education is very simple. It's just educate children together.
Same.
You know, don't invent, you know, just educate children together. You know, so my feeling is that if that is where the system goes, why would we need a little body? And we are quite a little body, NICIE, that is there to try and support integrated schools and the development of them, because that's what the education boards will do. That's what the system will do. And I include in that, you know, that little inkling we have even at the moment, that there may well be even schools within the Catholic sector out there who are saying, we're a small rural school, we have a mixed community, you know, there's cuts left, right and centre, we're in danger of closure. I wonder would the right thing for our local kids not be just to have a shared school, an integrated school? And so that's, I would be very hopeful of that, and that one day there won't be a NICIE, it would not be needed.
So at some stage we look forward to see a presentation on the strategic plan to the downturn of NICIE then.
I think, well, you know, I think your question really is very important, because it illustrates the complexity of where we are and how do we move beyond that so that we are in fact redundant. And I think that's why we said in our submission, is the time right for a pattern style inquiry, and by that we mean an independent style inquiry which can actually get above us and all our, if you like, own particular interests, and say what is the best way, and taking into account where we've come from to move us on more quickly than we're going at the moment.
Okay.
I'll leave it, Chair, in the interest of
time-wise, Mr. Eastwood.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation and for answering the questions. I was glad to hear you talking about different drums, like a lot of good things that come from Derry. But a lot of questions have been asked, and I know we're short of time, but you've probably answered this already, but I think one of the fears around integrated education that some people would have would be around the fact that people assume that when kids go into the school that it's neutral, that there's a neutral space, and that people's, you know, I know you say that people are changing their attitudes to things, but you know, people are still Irish, or still nationalists, or still unionists, or still British, and I think that's not a bad thing. Can you, you probably have given some assurances, but can you give assurances that you're not trying to create a neutral environment, that you're trying to create a diverse environment?
I think I'll leave it to a parent to do that.
Well, I can only speak from my own experience as my children going through and being a governor in an integrated school as well. I don't see any evidence that the children coming through the doors of the integrated schools that I'm involved in, that somehow, you know, that they come in, you know, as individuals and come out as some sort of homogenous mass. You know, I simply don't see any evidence of that. I realise it's a fear, and we respect that that's a fear of parents. I think in the integrated sector, we try very hard in terms of our promotion, our awareness raising, is to illustrate that in fact the activities and what goes on in integrated schools actually reflect the diverse nature of the schools. But we do acknowledge that, but certainly the intention is not to create, as I say, a homogenous mass, but rather to allow young people actually to explore the identities that they have and perhaps take on new identities. As Noreen said, we change identity, we add to our identity as we go along, and with the integrated ethos and environment, I think that is really supportive of young people being able to do that.
The research actually shows this, and there's been a lot of research into integrated schools, and it shows that young people who have come through integrated education do maintain a strong sense of their unique identity, do maintain very strong friendships across the divide into adulthood, do have a more positive view of building good community relations, and also have this sort of added additional identity of us. So I am this, but I am also us. So it's very interesting research on that.
It's very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Craig has indicated as a last one, but very briefly.
Very briefly. Sure. I'm a bit like Trevor here. I was sitting doing a lot of listening there to some of the questions and both the replies there. And I just want to go back to this whole area, this issue of area planning, because I find this intriguing. But I think I now understand where you're coming from, Noreen, on this one. You've sort of indicated that your ambition is to replace the system that's there with your integrated model. Is that the rationale, which means that you really don't take on board any of the impact that the creation of a new school causes to existing schools and area plans that are already there?
No, it's not actually what I'm saying at all. Quite the opposite. I'm saying that area-based planning, we're not saying we want to replace the model with a system of integrated schools. We want to replace the model of segregation and difference with a model of schools that all are diverse and all offer an equality of ethos within that school. Now, those are the characteristics of an integrated school, but this isn't about a sector, and it isn't about a legal status. It's about the experience of young people on a daily basis. And we think within area-based planning, this can be achieved. If I give you an example, what happens at the moment, and we've some fairly controversial example of this, if we take the two Vita schools in the South Eastern Education and IB Board, the proposal there was to close Newton Vita and Knock Vita and open a new school. What type of new school were they opening? They were opening the same type of school. So the parents were, both sets of parents were annoyed they were losing their school, but the parents hadn't any voice in shaping what type of new school those parents might wish. Now, we say the parents ought to have been involved in saying, well, at the moment we have a range of types of school. What does it mean? What would those schools look like? And which would best suit you parents starting a new school in your area to serve the needs of your area and your children? And then what you have then is you have parental involvement in the new school, not parental disapproval. And where you have parental involvement, you have better results and better outcomes because the young people buy in and you have a school which can succeed. So we're not looking to say, do this our way. We're saying, put parents first, put children first, put future needs of our society first, and find a means of doing it in a way which moves us beyond division.
Noreen, I'll listen with interest to that because I think you're right. Parental choice should come first, and I think there's no question about that. And I find this intriguing because if your model is the correct model that should be used everywhere, you've been in existence for how many years now?
About 32.
32 years. In that period, how many schools have you succeeded in converting from either controlled or maintained to the integrated sector? Because it strikes me that that's the way to go forward. Instead of displacing schools, converting them.
I couldn't agree with you more. And what has happened to date is there are 22 schools have transformed, but we feel that they've transformed because the onus has been put on parents. Whereas in our model, let's take the example we just discussed. The parents of Newton Vida and Knock Vida might have said, we're serving an area where there's plenty of diversity. We want an all-ability school for our children so some aren't streamed off to grammar schools, leaving the mess feeling second-class citizens. We want a co-educational school, and we want a school that recognises all religions. Now, that's happened. There's a new school being created. So the question isn't displace schools. The question is, get the new schools right. Or the question is, here is an